Nice to see you today. Thank you for being with me.
I'm grateful to be here with you, brother.
Yeah. So, as we briefly discussed, the point and objective of Community Voices is to give back to business professionals and or nonprofit operators. And I know that you're both a businessman and you own or you run a nonprofit. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, certainly. So thanks again. We it's an absolute privilege to be able to share space with you. As a father of 2 teenagers and the husband of the most amazing woman in the world, it's a gift to be able to wake up every day and steward this cause and serve our community through the work of Choose 180. And it is funny, people are like business, nonprofit. The only real difference is that, that if you have a for-profit business that you're operating typically for the benefit of the stakeholders, whoever that may be. In a nonprofit, our stakeholder is the community. And so we're constantly doing everything we can to honor our commitment to community, and any profits that we have at the end of the year go directly right back to the cause, and we continue to advance the mission forward. And so, yeah, I've been an entrepreneur, I feel like, since birth. And I've had the privilege to sell a variety of different things, and to be able to promote this cause has been the pinnacle of my life up until this point.
So Choose 180 is a remarkable nonprofit, and it has a remarkable philosophy and approach to how it's approaching civil discourse or social discourse or social discussion. Can you tell everyone more about Choose 180 and what you are doing in the community?
Yeah, certainly. We're an organization that's committed to dismantling systems of injustice while supporting the young people who are disproportionately impacted by those systems. And what that looks like is we get into these really intentional partnerships with people that are in prosecuting attorneys' offices, that work in law enforcement, the courts, school superintendents, folks like that have their pulse on these large institutions that have caused historical harm to Black community. And then we work with them to transform their practices while supporting the young people who are harmed. And so in the criminal legal system, it looks like young people whose behavior is criminalized because they live in neighborhoods that are overly policed. And instead of them getting referred to courtrooms, they get referred back to us in community, and we get to work with them as they commit to a new direction for their life. And in schools, it looks like young people who would likely be suspended or expelled. And instead of them going through that process of being removed from a classroom setting, they get to stay in that space, and we work with them to teach them the skills they need to be able to thrive and build community around them so they can honor a commitment to a better way of being. We are stubbornly looking for ways we can position ourselves at pivotal moments in a young person's life so we can truly help them pause and commit to a new direction.
So one thing I really admire about your approach from learning, in our discussions and in passing is you not only focus on, helping the community by, redirecting the course of a disciplinary action, so to speak, right?
Yeah, sure.
But you also have an approach that's unlike what I've seen, unlike anything I've ever seen, actually, I should say. And it's you take the time to get to know the prosecutors, the police officers, and the people who are at the top. So you're addressing the issue or the challenges not only from the community perspective, but also from an administrative perspective.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that? Enlighten us, please.
Yeah, well, the challenge with the nonprofit, we call it the nonprofit industrial complex, is that organizations can exist in perpetuity whenever there's harm, right? And so if there's consistently young people being harmed, young people who are being marginalized, young people who are being disproportionately arrested and incarcerated, then we could exist forever. But that would mean like our existence is contingent upon the suffering of the very young people that we are here to serve. So it behooves us as an organization to work closely with those that are causing harm to dismantle those systems in effort so that we no longer need to exist. We have to be constantly working ourselves out of a job. If we're not, then we're in the wrong business altogether. There isn't a nonprofit that exists that should imagine themselves existing in perpetuity. Whatever the space, whether it's a institution or they're working on drug treatments or whatever it is, we should always be looking to be the end and not the means.
That's awesome. So during the time of COVID, have you seen any, have you had any challenges that you've come up against in terms of running the nonprofit? You've grown it from I think it was a one full-time staff, right, to several, now you have several people, 26.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So have you seen any challenges, and what has been your mindset that's carried you through 2020 and any other challenging moments?
Some challenge, you trying to get in my personal life now, David, right? I mean, who hasn't been challenged in the time of COVID, right? I'm absolutely challenged that like my teenager has way too much screen time. Like, I'm challenged by that. I'm challenged that my son is in a dorm room taking virtual classes and showed up on our FaceTime the other day with 2 nose piercings. I'm like, really, what are we doing? Like, you're really discovering yourself. I'm challenged because like I'm tired of like feeling like I'm stuck within a small radius where I travel day in and day out. But like organizationally, yeah, there's been some challenges, brother. First and foremost, none of us thought this was going to be like a year-long plus thing, right? We were like, oh, okay, it'll be a couple weeks, and then we'll get back to normal. And then it was a month, and then it was 6 weeks, and then it was 2 months, and before we know it, we're a year plus into this thing. And we've been fortunate, and I couch that word fortunate with sensitivity. Because we've added staff during the pandemic, but because the need has increased in the community. And so when I say fortunate, we've been fortunate to be able to respond to the need as it's grown because our community has continued to support our work in a significant way. But like, we should never be fortunate because of the misfortunes of others. Right? So we've added staff during the pandemic, which has been really complicated, right? How do you bring people on and invite them to be a part of a culture if they've only met people virtually and never have been in physical space with them? The young people that we served historically would be served in person, and now everything's through a Zoom call or through a FaceTime with very limited like face-to-face interaction. Even some of the larger systemic shifts that we've been working on, some of that was accelerated, which some people would think is that's a good thing, right, in your business. But if you're not able to meet the demand, right, when their demand increases because there simply isn't enough supply, then it causes terrific stress and strain. And in our work, when the social unrest began to reach its zenith, there was a terrific interest in practices like ours. And so we had to staff accordingly to be able to meet the need as people were pressing in to want to see more reforms, more changes, more things systemically shift. Which has created a lot of long days, sleepless nights, and but this is what we do it for. In the height of it all, some people were like, "Are you tired?" I'm like, "Well, do you ask? When you get to the Super Bowl, are you tired? It's the end of the season." No, this is what you practice and play for moments to see systems change and people awaken to the great injustices that have been perpetuated on Black bodies throughout the history of this country. And while people are awake and paying attention, we better go as hard and as fast as we can to get this thing to move, because it's a very long journey, this journey towards justice, but it's most effectively traveled when we do it together.
I love it. Capitalizing on the alertness of the world and this time, capitalizing in the sense of bringing more exposure while everybody is, pretty much being awakened to what has been going on, obviously, in our country and around the world. So I think that's very powerful, super powerful. So, Sean, what did you do before Choose 180? Like, what was your career path, and what inspired you to start a nonprofit? I mean, it can be a confusing process. I know there's a lot of paperwork. Not saying that a lot of paperwork is confusing, but my point is it can, like, how do you make money in a nonprofit? Can you tell us a little bit more about like what your mindset was when you made the pivot, so to speak, and got into the nonprofit space? Yeah.
When I first graduated high school, I went right into sales. I went to community college, and I tell people I went to community college and got my first degree in procreation. I met my ex-wife, and we became pregnant at 19 and had my son at 20. So I went to work, and I found that, I knew early on that I had a leaning towards sales and being an entrepreneur. So I went into sales and was making reasonable money. And even as that relationship fell apart and I navigated that trauma in my early 20s, I still was able to compartmentalize and be really successful at sales. And candidly, I was making really good money. I was spending the majority of the good money I was making, and I found myself in a lot of bad habits, a lot of late nights and early morning engaging in activities that my son wouldn't be proud of and wouldn't honor the gift of the day that I was leaning into. So after having that experience and like making money and in this entrepreneurial space, I needed to slow down. And I took a turn in career and got an hourly job, which was super confusing at first. because I was like, what, I'm better than other people at this and I still make the same? Like, I've been here for a month, I should make more now, right? And so I didn't really understand how that worked. And then I found myself in the social service space at the YMCA, where there was a person there that took a chance on me. I didn't have any social work experience. They said, we'll hire you for 90 days, and if you can prove it, then you can apply for this job again and we'll interview you again. And so I worked there for 90 days, interviewed for the gig, and I was there for a little over 7 years, doing a variety of different things, from helping young people get jobs to gang and group intervention. Over the course of time, you begin to see where the gaps are, and you begin to see where white supremacy manifests itself, and you begin to see where white dominant culture infiltrates black and brown spaces, and you want better and you want to be able to do more for the people who you most closely identify with. And so when the opportunity presented itself to steward this cause, I was grateful to be able to lean in. Now, I didn't start the work, it began in 2011 before me, but when I did take over stewardship of the work, as you alluded to earlier, it was just me. And we've been able to build this thing off the strength of our community, this broad community of support that believes that young people are possibilities to be developed, not problems to be solved. And grown it to not only be able to serve upwards of 700 young people a year, but to employ 26 people as full-time staff throughout a pandemic, and many of which come from backgrounds like the young people that we're supporting. I'm driven at this work because I believe in the power of possibility. I'm driven at this work because I know that no matter how much wealth you gain in life, the greatest wealth and the greatest riches we have is in our shared humanity. And the closer we can be connected with that shared humanity, the more satisfied we can feel with the accomplishments that we've carried forward in this life. And so whenever I'm called to transition out of this world, I'm going to be grateful to know that the mark that I've left wasn't one that only was signified by commas and zeros, although I'll take that, but was also signified by leaving a legacy behind of leadership, of development, care and compassion, and an unapologetic love for our shared experience on this planet. And I know it well from the depths of my soul from early on in my life, and I'm grateful I get to bring that forward.
How can the community support you, and what is, or even if we reverse the order, what is the vision of Choose 180 in the next year or 2 years, and how can people best support you?
Yeah. The vision question is always like the funny one to me, right? Because I'm sure you've experienced this in your own life, and maybe it's not true, but if somebody would have told me, a little over 4 years ago, when I was sitting in that office all by myself, that I would be sitting down having conversations like this with you, I would have been like, oh, okay, sign me up for that, right? You just don't see these things coming. And if you would have had a 5-year plan that you began in 2019, I doubt anybody wrote the pandemic into it, right? Like, if you did that, like, okay, like I need to get some other advice from you, right? And so when I think about planning, I think more about orientation and getting closer to where it is we desire to be at the core, and not so much as distance traveled, if that makes sense. And the vision that we hold is transforming these systems of injustice and making sure that there's less harm caused to our young people, and making sure that every young person in our country has the opportunity to choose 180. And we see the beginnings of that happening within our cause. We recently partnered with some folks in the state of Utah to expand programming out there, and we're having some conversations with the folks in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to expand programming out there, some folks in Ohio that are interested in the work that we've been able to do here, and all that's really exciting, and the possibilities are limitless to be able to grow the reach. And I wouldn't have been able to see any of that. But the vision that I held when I first took over stewardship is the one that we continually see manifest itself, and that is wherever there's harm being done, intentionally or unintentionally, where a young person has the opportunity to pivot, how can we place ourselves there? Whether our organization or the wealth of knowledge that we've been able to gain since we've been journeying over the past 10 years, and help institutions correct themselves to cause less harm, and help community members, community partners, build themselves up to be the solution that they need to be on the ground to support young people wherever they are. So, if we were to dream big, right, and just say in 5 years from now, even though I don't really load the 5-year plan, if 5 years from now we were serving in multiple cities across our country, whether offering program there directly or teaching community partners and systems how to work well with each other to transform those systems of injustice, and how to offer programming that's culturally competent to meet the needs of Black children specifically, but BIPOC children more generally speaking, that would be beautiful. If we had our curriculum complete and it was being licensed out to people who were offering mentorship programs or any youth direct service programs across our nation, that would be wonderful. is some of our folks that have lived experience, that have grown and developed as incredible storytellers. We're teaching people across the country how to share their stories and tell their stories to transform their community. Oh, that would be beautiful as well. And if regionally we were able to serve beyond King County, but also Pierce and Snohomish County, and get across the mountains to Spokane County to really begin to engage in some of the cracks and crevices where our Black and brown children are so frequently overlooked, that would also be beautiful. One thing I know with great certainty is that none of these things are possible without our community of support. And everything that we've accomplished over these past 4+ years has been because of people like you, who have simply heard our story, taken a moment to lean in and understand our cause, and chosen to support us in a way that's personally meaningful so we could advance this effort as the collective us.
I want everybody just to sit in that for a second. Before we move to closing remarks, can you tell us what is trifling our community so much? And I especially like some of the comments and things that I've listened to that say once a child has been introduced to the system, the chance of them coming back is really high. I remember I got a disturbing the peace violation when I was 16. And for me, it was like, I never want to be here ever again. You know, they give me community service. And you talk about how a criminal punishment versus, I think, a community-oriented punishment is, like there's a difference between the two. But why is it important? Now, I understand, but for people who may not be understanding the underlying impact of, if we interject with laws and stigma, you know, what happens to happens to people? You know, what happens to Black children, Black and brown children?
Great question, David. You know, no matter how hard I've tried, I've yet to find the ice cream without calories. And I am fully persuaded that no matter how many cookies I want to eat, that there is going to be an adverse effect on my body as a result of that. Now, if I could find the calorie-less cookie that tastes like a really good cookie, sign me up. Or the calorie-less ice cream that tastes like really good ice cream, sign me. They just don't exist. Right. And so I know naturally that if I eat that ice cream or I eat that cookie, that I'm going to have to exercise my tail off because my metabolism of my 20s has long since left me. And I got to put in so much more work to be able to offset that gain, that weight gain, which is really a loss, right? And so I say that simply to say this, is we know the negative impacts because we've seen it over generations. The question is how much longer are you going to go to the cupboard and get those cookies? Or how often are you going to go to that freezer and get that ice cream before we all find ourselves in a diabetic coma holding on to our last breath, wanting to know what's next? At a certain point, we have to recognize that what we've done has only caused harm. Now, there's a different way to do harm reduction, and it's through the lens of public health. If someone is suffering, and someone is hurting, and someone is contagious, they're likely to get someone else sick that's proximate to them. We know that now more than ever. So what is an appropriate treatment to be able to support someone so they're healthy, and they're not in a position to harm others? And if they have harmed others, for that person who's harmed to be able to heal. Our criminal legal system doesn't do that. Our criminal legal system very rarely meets the need of the harm party and consistently causes more harm to the person who was accused in the first place and keeps them in this cycle of consistently ending up in this criminal legal system, right? So what's the answer? What's the solution? We're not going to solve it through problems. We have to create new possibilities. And work like ours is exactly that. From the foundation of this earth, from the beginning, we can take it all the way back to the garden, right? Where there was fig leaves and fruit and all the things in between. One principle that has been everlasting, that is undeniable, that grace is the greatest motivator for behavior change. And it's a far better motivator for behavior change than guilt. When you've done great harm and you're forgiven, the responsibility you feel to that forgiveness is a greater weight than the guilt you will ever feel for what it is that you've done. And not only is it a greater weight to hold you accountable to doing something good with that opportunity, it's also a reminder that you are not the worst decision that you ever made in your life. And none of us should be. All of us should have the opportunity to receive that type of grace. And if we have a system that's based on grace, that means we have a system that's based on understanding our shared humanity. And if we are in a space where understanding our shared humanity, the greatest catalyst to harm, which is an unexplainable fear that we carry towards one another, is gone. And then we're truly able to walk out this thing like it was designed to be done. In relationship, proximate, loving, caring, compassionate, expressed out in full humanity with one another. Black, brown, indigenous, people of color, and all. I mean, that's what I imagine that the good Dr. King envisioned when he had his address at the Washington Monument. You know, the Lincoln Memorial Monument. You know, where we had this dream, and here we are, some 50 some odd years later, and it's yet to come to fruition. Well, what are the material conditions that are still the same, and how can we begin to deconstruct those things and create other outcomes?
Do you believe it starts with the psychological? Like, it's the idea that having a dream and the fact that we have streets, you know, named after MLK, and we have buildings, and we have the idea, you know, like how they, like during a large turn in the nation here with all of this, with just pretty much everything that happened in 2020, right? They started tearing down these Confederate statues because it was a psychological reminder every time you drive by that, hey, this used to be your condition. Yeah. So do you feel like with greater, okay.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But do you feel like saying, hey, the fact that, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Had a dream, that it starts on a psychological level first and then it materializes?
Well, I think it's, certainly, right? But here's the reality, right? We don't need to go to, if you walk outside your home and you're reminded daily of the condition that you're living in, the material condition that subjugates you to a feeling of being less than, right? Then how can you ever psychologically evolve beyond the material condition that you see in front of yourself every single day? We had food bank Thursdays growing up, right? Like, I knew on Thursday that we were going to have food in our house, and that food needed to last us at least for that week, right? I was very much aware of our material condition. Now, how am I, and when I'm looking forward to Food Bank Thursday, supposed to be excited about the possibility of generational wealth? That's not even a concept that I could hold. Now, I could listen to the rap stars that I idolized, right? And the athletes and think like there may be a couple avenues on the way out. But like psychologically, that's not even a weight that I can bear because I can't conceptualize what that possibility even looks like because it's not presented for me in a way that makes any kind of sense.
So then how were you able to break through?
Well, it's a couple things, right? This is where the community of support is so vital and so pivotal, right? If not for people who saw me first as a possibility to be developed and not a problem to be solved, then I wouldn't have been able to orient myself in a way where I could begin to see possibility within me and then possibility within others. And no, it really, generational wealth wasn't even a concept that I even began to lean into until I got into my 30s, because I still didn't see that path forward for me, right? I saw a path forward where I no longer had to be in debt, right? I saw a path forward where I could pay my rent, right? Where I could manage my bills, right? Where I could have a little bit of something in savings that I could spend on things that I wanted, because that was my whole concept of savings, what you had left over to spend, right? But like, it's the exposure to these things in a real way from people who look like, people who came from, people who have an understanding of those material conditions, and then the resources to complement that then create a transformative space. That's the power of our work, because when we show up in space with young people, we're showing up with people who have the similar lived experiences. We're talking through those experiences. We're showing them that there's a way to pause and commit to a new direction and that they too can make this commitment. But then we're not leaving them there. We're saying, here, we're going to walk with you and give you the resources you need to honor that commitment and find out where those people are in community that are going to support you and lift you up. Too often in our country, we do this thing around these imaginary bootstraps where we say, well, here, we're going to give you a pair of shoes, walk this thing out. But we're walking across glass that's been laid before us that makes the path so much more treacherous regardless what you have on your feet. Needless to say that we're not all equipped the same. But what can we do different? Well, I absolutely believe in the vision of people like you that think like, man, if I can create a platform where I'm able to develop generational wealth and I can go back to community, and I can engage young people who were in spaces just like I was, young people who I can relate to because of my lived experience or the experience I was proximate to, and I can show them something else. But not only show them something else, but resource avenues for them to live into that thing, then we begin to see the broader economical uplift that we need in our Black community and our indigenous people of color communities. But until then, we have a proposition that looks great, but not the resources to actually live into it. I mean, you're in real estate, for goodness sakes. How many people do you meet that have like the vision of having a humongous home, and then when they start like getting approved for the loan, right, and they start considering what those mortgage payments look like, they begin to change their expectations, right? Like, we need the resources to make that happen. And that's a big lift of the work that you're doing, creating the space for stories like this to be told, for people to lean in, connect in an intentional way, for the resources to manifest themselves so we can journey towards justice on purpose with each other.
So in closing, my last question, or one question I usually like to ask is, what is something about you that everyone or someone wouldn't know about you unless they were graced by your presence one-on-one?
That I am a connoisseur of dad jokes. Well, I don't know if that counts. But that is a thing. Yeah, I absolutely love dad jokes. That I have an addiction to watching Law and Order. That's another thing. And I low-key have a guilty pleasure of watching Judge Judy. Those are things that people wouldn't know unless they actually met me, which is ironic with the work that I do. I know. That's not lost on me. Yeah, I think most important is that at the core of my being, I don't believe that any of what it is that I experienced was an accident. And since all of it was on purpose, I have the liberty to live it on purpose. I think what people don't know is that I get tired. What people don't know is that I experience fear, that I experience anxiety, and that there's moments where I'm absolutely insecure and I'm not sure what's on the other side. But I don't think people know that, because what they see is the manifestation of this unapologetic faith that I carry as a counterbalance. That I know that if God has brought me this far, then the steps that are set before me can't be any more challenging than the ones that were behind me. And that if I've already survived 100% of my worst days, then what's next?
Glory.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, brother.
I appreciate you, man.
Appreciate you too.
Thank you for allowing me to come into your space. Where can people find you? Please.
Yeah, you can tap into our organization at iChoose180 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or at our website at www.choose180.org. And feel free to lean in whatever way you're most comfortable. Follow us, share our stuff, make a contribution to the cause if you feel so inclined. But most importantly, when you walk out your doors, make sure you're acknowledging the shared humanity of all of us, because that is the greatest catalyst to transformation that we have.
Beautiful. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this interview with Sean Goode. Thanks.